Hello and welcome to the New Statesman podcast. On this week's episode, Sarah Manavis joins us to discuss the rise of eco-fascism.
Sarah Manavis, our digital culture writer, wrote a very interesting piece this week about the rise of eco-fascism. Now, this is something you've written about before, isn't it, Sarah? But it's come up during coronavirus because of the sort of apparently innocent narrative about how the planet is recovering while all of the nation is under lockdown.
Yeah, so it's one of these weird things where I originally wrote about ecofascism in 2018, and it was incredibly niche at the time. It was one of these things where, like, you know, it was a couple of people, well, not a couple, but there was a group of people mostly living on 4chan and certain parts of Reddit who essentially at the time were just vegan ethno-nationalists, I guess is like the simplest way to put it. So people who like were really big like environmentalists in the sort of traditional way you would expect, you know, like no single-use plastic. Yeah, again, like veganism, that kind of thing, like low carbon emissions, and were activists, but also sort of had this weird element in which they believed that the only way to save the planet was for people to go back to like their original, and by original, they don't mean where you were born, they mean racially your original homeland. And through that, somehow the planet would be saved because people would just be staying where these eco-fascists thought that they were from. That was what it was in 2018. It sort of morphed over time. The Christchurch shooter in 2019 cited eco-fascism in his manifesto he uploaded before the shooting. And now we have this new iteration, which is like a more watered down thing, which is essentially where you believe that human life is worth sacrificing for the sake of the environment. And that's kind of where we are now. So you have this weird uprising or sort of reemergence of eco-fascism, where people believe that the effects of coronavirus, i.e. the fact that people are stuck inside, they can't be traveling on planes, they can't be going out, you know, buying lots of things, consuming lots of things that do ultimately hurt the planet, but that sort of really, really scary and very deadly impact is worth it for those, I guess you could call them environmental silver linings.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's all these sort of mawkish videos and memes and clips of animals and other things like wandering around cities, and this suggestion that, like, you know, we've saved the planet with this virus. Some of them are just more fun and seem more innocent than others, but they all make me feel slightly uncomfortable. And I think it is because of that sort of implied sacrifice. But where does the sort of discrimination and racism come into this new sort of form of eco-fascism?
It's also worth saying that a lot of those images that you're seeing of animals returning to their natural habitats in cities are not real images. Like, for example, one of the biggest ones was like dolphins returning to Venice, the Venice canals, and most of those images, or if not all of those images, were just photoshopped images. Yeah, so the racist element is essentially that when you look at coronavirus and its impact, not necessarily for like a biological reason, but because of like socioeconomic reasons, Black and minority ethnic and Asian people are the people that are being disproportionately affected when it comes to the death toll. So it's here in the care system, when you look at doctors, nurses. Anoush wrote this great piece that sort of cited this, along with many other interesting things, that is disproportionately affecting BAME, doctors, nurses, etc. And then even if you look in places like the US, it doesn't even go just to the care system, it goes way beyond that. That if you are Black, if you are Asian, minority ethnic, you are more likely to die from this virus, at least statistically, in the US. So when we sort of celebrate these things, which I'm not saying that every celebration means that you're like some raging eco-fascist, there is a cost, and trying to pretend that that cost doesn't exist or that there's some sort of positive side to that cost. It isn't just the fact that people are dying, but this is disproportionately affecting people that are not white. And so that is where sort of eco-fascism gets to relay its ground a bit, where it can kind of not necessarily saying people need to go back to where they came from, but it's still valuing white life above all else alongside valuing the planet.
So what's the kind of eco-fascist radicalization journey? So is it that you basically have traditional fascists who are convinced by the science for climate change? Or is it that you have people who are seriously green who then go a bit fash?
I think it's probably more of the latter. I think it's similar with pretty much any type of radicalization. This is also sort of with the foundational principle that like systemic racism exists and people can be predisposed to that anyways. But a lot of the time with online radicalization, people don't come at it through being like, I want to be a bigot and I'm bigoted and I need a home for that. A lot of it comes through a mutual shared interest in something else, or sort of like a common ground. Like when you look at incels, so involuntary celibates, the way that those kind of guys who, are middle-aged or older virgins become radicalized into being like an incel misogynist is because, they're all sort of harboring together saying, oh, we're all middle-aged virgins, that sucks. Oh, maybe women are the problem. And so similarly with ecofascism, it's a lot of people who think like, oh my God, we must do something to save the planet. And you suddenly have this weird situation, which is like so unbelievably strange and unpredictable. And you go, oh, there's a solution for this. And like, maybe actually I can rationalize in my head that it's okay that people are dying because people were going to die if the planet was going to die. And so you can get radicalized in that way. And again, there is that racial element always in play because of the way that these deaths are working and the way that the statistics are for coronavirus deaths. So yeah, I think it's more of that journey. Obviously, there are plenty of people who are just like violently racist, who are just looking for any new shade of racism to sort of push out into the world. And I think a lot of the time, the eco-fascists that you'll have seen in the first place, or people that are maybe trying to radicalize people into becoming eco-fascists now, will already just be predisposed to racism, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're just trying to trick other people into believing that. But I think like the average person who maybe goes from posting the planet is healing on Facebook to becoming like a full-on fascist, that's more their journey, is that they come into it thinking, oh, maybe this isn't all so bad. And then suddenly they think, oh, actually, this is okay to advocate for.
And Sarah, what are the main ways that eco-fascists organise? I know you mentioned 4chan and Reddit and ethno-nationalists sort of beginning there in 2018. Is that still mainly the way this manifests?
Ecofascism is a really interesting one because I think a lot of people probably are ultimately eco-fascists without realizing that they're eco-fascists because it is relatively new, in the grand scheme of fascisms and their different strains. Like this is one that is like relatively new versus ones that were sort of around maybe 2012 to 2016 that now have had time to morph and kind of get faces and icons. Whereas I think ecofascism is a little bit more, this is a weird thing to say, grassroots at the moment. And so, yeah, I think it's actually a lot of just people in the green movement, people I've spoken to that are kind of in the climate change environment that know about ecofascism say that you can sort of spot an ecofascist just through, Facebook groups and things like that, purely based around green issues in general. But I think in terms of the people that are actually saying like, let's radicalize more people or get more people on board with this movement that we have, you can find them on Twitter, you can find them on Reddit, you can find them on 4chan. And they do tend to organize online because it's not a geographically based thing. It's mostly Europe, the US, Canada, but they're pretty much everywhere. And most of it is still online, I guess you could say, organization.
In terms of the kind of the US kind of chapter of it, so what is the relation than these people have with like the rest of the far right? Because obviously, particularly in the States, that is also where there is an awful lot of climate change denial. So like how do like the rest of the online fascists feel about the eco-fascists?
Well, so going back to what I said about the Christchurch shooter is, again, these are things that like I didn't really ever expect myself to be talking about or saying. The eco-fascists are sort of like, I would say, kind of the often mocked strain of fascism amongst the rest of the fascists. When the Christchurch shooter said he was an eco-fascist in his manifesto that he uploaded online before committing those shootings, he said he was an eco-fascist, but people are pretty sure that that was like an ironic reading because for the most part, eco-fascists get made fun of because they're sort of soft and all of this is motivated by like their love of the planet. And also a lot of what they're interested in, at least like the really hardcore ones or like the ones I spoke to in 2018, they're very interested in like Norse mythology and Thor, and it's kind of like traditionally nerdy stuff. Whereas like a lot of the alt-right is very like macho, even though they're not necessarily like the most traditional macho guys if you were to come across them. So I think that in the ecosystem of fascists, the eco-fascists are kind of like this sort of like weird, kind of mocked, almost like social pariah of that realm. However, the way I came across ecofascism in the first place was because I was investigating people who were whitewashing architectural history on Twitter and Reddit. And there is sort of this increasingly growing, very traditional European obsessed, white European obsessed group of what, you could call the alt-right. And their overlap in the US, I don't think is as strong as it potentially is here in the UK or in Europe generally. However, they do definitely exist, but I think in like the US space, they are kind of seen as like the dorky, nerdy ones, which again, is such a weird thing to say out loud. But yeah, that is kind of how they're viewed.
So really, actually, in many ways, eco-fascists would be, if there was a fascist equivalent to the New Statesman podcast, they would broadly be our Venn diagram. God, that is an insane thought, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a really apt way to put it for these listeners. I'm sure that will make a lot of sense to everyone.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because you usually associate environmentalism and even extreme environmentalism with the left. And I know that you've written about Extinction Rebellion in your piece and how they had a problem with sort of that meme or that tweet. I can't remember in what form it was that went around that was saying Corona is the cure, humans are the disease. And it was kind of being associated with an account that was pretending to be part of Extinction Rebellion. But the genuine group has also had a bit of a problem with its whiteness. And, I've spoken to people who are some of the organisers who are aware that that's one of their problems, that they are exclusive in terms of race and class, even if it's not intentional. So it's interesting how all of these different things cross over, in a more shallow sense, in mainstream sort of eco-activism.
Yeah, totally. And I do think you do see this sort of increasingly, especially in the UK, like increasingly middle and almost like upper class versions. I mean, I guess like fascism always has had that, but like in that kind of what you would see as like a left wing interest or activism, you see these sort of like middle class, really upper class fascist versions of it. And that is part of the thing with eco-fascists. A lot of the time they are like quite wealthy, like, you'll look at their Instagrams or their Twitter and it's like they have quite like flashy clothes or nice houses, and in many ways can like afford a lifestyle, which a lot of the time to be like completely eco-friendly is expensive. And so yeah, I do think you get to see this thing where these traditionally left or considered to be a part of the left things do have these fash tendencies. And yeah, and it's a lot more common than you think. And I do think it permeates a lot of different things. Like, again, like architecture is another thing. And unfortunately, something like coronavirus will just be like a magnifying glass to a much, much wider audience. And part of it is that even if you don't necessarily believe in eco-fascism and you're not necessarily like, I love the planet and like, I think it's okay for people to die, and particularly for anybody who's not white to die in order for the planet to be quote unquote saved, a lot of the people that like operate in these online spaces like do enjoy just doing things as a joke. And so with those Extinction Rebellion stickers, like I would not be surprised if that was done as a joke, like not by people who necessarily want to discredit Extinction Rebellion or people that necessarily like do believe that like coronavirus is the cure and we are the virus. But yeah, it's just like, it's funny. It's going to be a viral story. You're going to be able to say to your friends, like, look, we got major organizations to cover that. And that's kind of the end game. So yeah, I think like this stuff is just going to be bigger and bigger. And we're only 2 months in with many months more to go.